The first thing my wife heard inside my mind was not a secret. It was a name she had never heard me say. She froze halfway across the charity gala, one hand still wrapped around a champagne glass, while cameras flashed around her. Evelyn, our publicist, Marcus, touched her elbow. You okay? She didn't answer. Her eyes found me across the ballroom. I was standing beside a pillar, exactly where I always stood at events like this, far from the cameras, holding her coat and pretending I wasn't watching every person who approached her. Then she heard it again. Don't let Evelyn find out. My wife went pale. I had no idea that, 10 minutes earlier, she had developed the ability to hear people's thoughts. I only knew that something had changed when she walked directly toward me. Who is Evelyn? She asked. My fingers tightened around her coat. For 3 years, I had been married to the most famous actress in the country, Lena Hart. To the world, Lena was brilliant, glamorous, untouchable. To me, she was the woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder while watching terrible movies. The woman who once promised me, before her first major film, if I ever become famous, don't let me become someone you can't recognize. I had believed her. Maybe that was my first mistake. Where did you hear that name? I asked. Her expression changed. You know her? No. The answer came too quickly. Lena stared at me. Then she whispered, You lied. I wanted to explain. Instead, another voice called her name from behind us. Adrian Vale, her co-star, her former college friend, the man whose production company had recently hired her for a 3-film deal. He smiled at us. Lena, the reporters are waiting. She looked at me one more time before walking away. What's it, Tickle? I didn't know that she could hear minds. I didn't know she had just heard Adrian think. If she learns what her husband really did, she'll never forgive him. That night, Lena didn't come home with me. She stayed at the hotel. The next morning, I found a message waiting on my phone. We need to talk. I stared at those 4 words for almost a minute. Then I typed, Okay, no pleading, no questions. I had learned a long time ago that when Lena became frightened, giving her space was the only way to keep her from running. At least that's what I thought. When she arrived that afternoon, she didn't sit down. Tell me about Evelyn. There isn't much to tell. Then why did you think her name? I looked up. For the first time, I noticed something strange in her eyes. Fear. Not anger. Fear. She was my business partner, I said. Lena's lips parted. You had a business partner? I nodded. Before we married. And you never told me? You never asked. That isn't an answer. No, I said quietly. It isn't. She turned away. I remember the first apartment we shared. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people. Lena had burnt instant noodles because she was practicing lines for an audition. I had laughed until she threw a cushion at me. Back then, she didn't care that I had no famous friends. She didn't care that I worked 12-hour days. She only cared that I was there. Somewhere along the way, being there had stopped being enough. Lena faced me again. What happened to Evelyn? She left the company. Why? I hesitated. Because she betrayed me. Lena's expression hardened. What did she do? She stole something. What? I looked toward the window. My work. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything from you. That sentence seemed to hurt her more than I intended. She stepped closer. Then, tell me the truth. I looked directly into the eyes of the woman I had spent years protecting. The truth is that I built something before we met. Something I gave up so you could chase your dream. Her face went still. What did you give up? I didn't answer. Because the answer was the one thing I had never wanted her to know. And because at that exact moment, Lena heard my thoughts. I sold the company to protect her career. She stopped breathing. What company? I said nothing. And for the first time in our marriage, Lena looked at me as if she had never known me at all. The silence between us lasted so long that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Lena finally whispered, You sold the company? Yes. For me? I shook my head. Not exactly. Her eyes narrowed. Don't lie again. I didn't. I sat down. She remained standing. 3 years ago, before Lena's career exploded, she had received an offer for her first international film. There was one problem. The studio had discovered that the small technology company she had invested in with a group of friends was facing a legal dispute. If the dispute became public, the studio would drop her. I had been running that company quietly. Our software protected digital footage from being copied or altered without authorization. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And one of the investors had secretly falsified records, making it look as though Lena was involved. I spent months fighting the accusation. Then I discovered the only way to protect a reputation was to take responsibility for the company myself, settle the dispute, and sell my controlling shares. I never told Lena, because she was standing at the edge of the career she had dreamed about since childhood, and I couldn't bear to be the reason she lost it. The sale gave me enough money to clear the legal mess, but it also meant walking away from something I had spent 7 years building. Lena listened. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were finally happy. That wasn't your decision to make." I know. Her eyes filled with tears, but then her phone rang. "Adrian." She answered. "Hello." I watched her expression change. She suddenly looked confused, then frightened. "I'm coming." She hung up. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing." I almost smiled. She had lied, and now I understood why. She could hear thoughts. She was beginning to realize that not every lie came from me. "Lena," I said, "if something is wrong, tell me." She looked at me for several seconds. Then she said something I would remember for years. "I need time." "Okay." I didn't stop her when she left. That evening, I packed a small bag. Not because I intended to leave permanently. I simply wanted somewhere quiet to sleep. I went to the guest apartment I had kept since before our marriage. At midnight, Lena called. I answered. "Where are you?" "At the apartment." "Why?" "Because you asked for time." Silence. Then she said, "Come home." I closed my eyes. For a moment, the old instinct returned. Go back. Fix everything. Make her happy. But something inside me had changed. "I'll come tomorrow." She didn't respond. The call ended. The next morning, I discovered that someone had leaked documents about my old company to the press. By noon, headlines were everywhere. Lena Hart's husband hid secret business dealings. Did he use his wife's name to build his career? And by evening, Adrian held a press conference. He stood beside Lena. "I believe Lena was manipulated," he said solemnly. "She trusted the wrong person." I stared at the screen. Lena said nothing. That hurt more than Adrian's accusation. Then my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Daniel, you need to come to the office." "What?" "We found something." "What?" His voice dropped. "The documents being used against you weren't leaked by the old investors." I stood up. "Then who leaked them?" Marcus hesitated. "Someone inside Lena's new production company." I felt the room go cold. And then he said the words that made everything worse. "Daniel, the person who authorized the leak used Lena's private credentials." I looked at the photograph of my wife on the television. For the first time, I wondered whether the woman I had spent years protecting had become part of the betrayal. I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing. I was done begging people to believe me. By sunrise, my name was everywhere. Not because I had done anything extraordinary, because someone had decided I was guilty. The headlines called me a liar, a manipulator, even a parasite who had secretly used Lena's fame to make money. I watched them from a small apartment where I had spent the night. Then I turned off the television. I didn't call Lena. I didn't call the reporters. I didn't post a statement. For 3 years, whenever something threatened Lena, I had been the first person to step forward. This time, I stayed silent. At 9 in the morning, Marcus arrived with a folder. "You're really not going to defend yourself?" "I will. When I know exactly who I'm defending myself against." He frowned. "You think Lena did this?" "I don't know." "Then why aren't you angry?" I looked at him. "Because anger makes people careless." "Maku sight. You've always been too patient." I smiled faintly. That used to be a compliment. He opened the folder. Inside were transaction records from the company I had sold 3 years earlier. The leak included these. I scanned them. Something was wrong. One transfer had been highlighted. A payment from the company to a shell corporation. The date was 6 months after I had sold my shares. I didn't authorize this. "I know." "Who did?" Marcus pointed to the signature. "Evelyn." My stomach tightened. Evelyn had been the one person who knew how everything worked. She had also been the person I believed had betrayed me. But if she had continued operating after my departure, why was her name appearing now? Then I noticed something else. The payment had eventually moved into an entertainment investment fund, a fund owned by Adrian Vale. I stared at the document. Marcus whispered, "That's not all." He handed me another page. There were 3 payments, all connected to Adrian. My mind returned to the gala. If she learns what her husband really did, she'll never forgive him. Adrian had known about me. But why? I didn't have time to wonder. My phone buzzed. "Lena." I answered. "Daniel." Her voice sounded exhausted. "I know." "Know what?" "That you didn't do it." I closed my eyes. For a second, relief almost overwhelmed me. Then I heard her continue. "But I need you to understand something." "What?" "I heard something from you." My hand froze. "What did you hear?" "You were thinking about Evelyn." I said nothing. "She was important to you." "She was important to my company." "That isn't what I heard." I leaned back. Lena had always been terrible at hiding jealousy. But this was different. "You don't trust me." "I want to." "That isn't the same thing." She became quiet. Then she said, "Adrian says you hid money from me." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because after everything I had sacrificed, that accusation somehow felt absurd. "Did you ask him for proof?" "Yes." "And he didn't have it." "Then why believe him?" She didn't answer. I realized then that something strange was happening inside my marriage. Lena wasn't simply listening to rumors. She was listening to thoughts. And the more mine she heard, the more confused she became about whom she could trust. That evening, she went to Adrian's office. She didn't tell me, but she didn't need to. For the first time since gaining her strange ability, she had learned how dangerous it could be. Adrian greeted her warmly. "You look tired. I need to ask you something." "Anything." "Did you leak Daniel's records?" His smile didn't move. "No." But his mind screamed the opposite. "She can't know about the account." Lena stared at him. "What account?" His smile disappeared. "What? You thought about an account." "I don't know what you're talking about." She stepped backward, and suddenly she heard dozens of thoughts from the people outside his office. Assistants, managers, employees, fear, guilt, secrets. She realized Adrian wasn't surrounded by loyal employees. He was surrounded by frightened people. Then one thought cut through the noise. If Lena finds the original contract, we're finished. She turned around. "What original contract?" Adrian grabbed her wrist. "Lena, listen to me." She pulled away. "You lied." His expression changed. And for the first time, Lena saw the man she thought she knew. Not the charming actor. Not her trusted friend. Someone much colder. "You should have stayed with Daniel," Adrian said. Lena's heart sank. "Why?" "Because he doesn't know how valuable he is." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" Adrian smiled bitterly. "Ask your husband what he built before you ever became famous." Then he walked away. Lena stood alone. And for the first time, she understood that the secret she had been searching for wasn't proof that Daniel had betrayed her. It was proof that everyone around her had been hiding something, including the husband she had just pushed away. That night, Lena returned to our house. I was already there. Not because she had asked me to come back, because I had gone to retrieve the rest of my belongings. She found me in the study, placing old notebooks into a cardboard box. She stopped at the door. "You're leaving?" I didn't look up. "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know." She swallowed. "Daniel, I think Adrian lied to me." "I know." She stared at me. "How?" "Because the transaction records connect him to the money." "You knew." "I found out this morning." "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally looked at her. "Would you have believed me?" She had no answer. I closed the box. Lena looked around the study. On the shelf were years of our life. Photographs, awards, a cheap wooden frame from our first anniversary, and a tiny paper star she had folded during our honeymoon. She picked it up. "You kept this?" "Of course." "Why?" "Because you gave it to me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've been hearing people's thoughts all day." I went still. She continued. "I hear what they don't say." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know how horrible that is?" "I can imagine." "No, you can't." Her voice broke. "Everyone lies. Everyone hides things. Everyone wants something." I looked at her quietly. "Not everyone." She looked at me. "What do you want?" I thought about it. For years, I would have answered immediately. I would have said I wanted her to succeed. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted our marriage to survive. But now, I want a life where I don't have to prove that I deserve to be loved. She lowered her head. Did you ever love me? I almost smiled. That question hurts more than anything else you've said. Why? Because you already know the answer. She cried silently. I didn't move toward her. That was the first time I understood how far I had changed. Once, her tears could make me forget every wound. Now I could care about her pain without abandoning my own. She whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I know. You don't forgive me." "I do." She looked up. "Then stay." I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't the same as returning. Her lips trembled. "Daniel, I need to go." She stepped toward me. "I can fix this." "No." "I can tell the press the truth." "No." "I can expose Adrian." "You should." "Then why won't you let me help you?" I picked up the box. "Because I'm not asking you to save me anymore." I walked past her. At the front door, she called my name. I stopped. She whispered, "Was there ever someone else?" I turned around. "No." Her eyes closed. That answer hurt her, because she finally understood that I hadn't left because I found another woman. I was leaving because I had finally realized I couldn't keep disappearing inside someone else's life. I drove away before midnight. For the first time in 3 years, I had no idea where I was going. The next morning, Marcus called. "Daniel, the press is saying you've disappeared." "I haven't." "Where are you?" I looked through the windshield. Ahead of me was a small coastal town where nobody knew my name. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." Marcus hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" "The old company just received a legal notice." "From whom?" "Evelyn." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "What's she claiming?" "She says the company was never legally yours to sell." I stared at the ocean ahead. "So the sale was invalid?" "That's what she's claiming." I exhaled slowly. For 3 years, I had believed Evelyn betrayed me. Now she was saying the opposite. And somewhere between those two stories was a truth I had never discovered. I didn't know that the answer would lead me back to the one thing I had abandoned. My work, the company I thought I had lost, and the dream I had buried for the sake of my marriage. I parked outside a small rented house. There was no luxury, no security team, no cameras, no famous wife, just an empty room, an old laptop, and silence. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom. I opened the laptop. A forgotten folder appeared on the screen. Its name was simple, Project Aurora. I stared at it. Then I smiled for the first time in months. Because I had forgotten one important fact. I had never stopped being the person who built it. I had only stopped believing that I was allowed to build something for myself. Project Aurora had been sitting untouched on my old laptop for 3 years. I had created the first version in a cramped office before Lena and I were married. It was an adaptive security system designed to detect manipulated digital footage. At the time, everyone told me it was too ambitious. I believed them. Then I remembered something else. Evelyn had never stolen my work. She had tried to warn me. I opened the oldest file. A message appeared. "Daniel, don't sell the company yet. There is something wrong with the investors." I stared at the screen. The message was dated 2 days before I sold my shares. I had never seen it. Someone had deleted it from the company server. I leaned back. For 3 years, I had carried the belief that Evelyn betrayed me. What if she had been trying to protect me? I spent the entire night going through archived files. By morning, I had discovered dozens of irregular transactions. The money had moved through shell companies before reaching Adrian's investment fund. But there was one problem. I had signed the final sale documents. Legally, I had accepted responsibility. Someone had wanted me to do exactly that. I called Marcus. "Can you find Evelyn? I thought you hated her." I was wrong. There was silence. Then Marcus said, "I'll find her." 2 days later, he gave me an address. Evelyn was living 3 hours away, running a tiny accounting office. I drove there myself. When she opened the door, she looked shocked. "You're alive." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She laughed sadly. "Nothing. Evelyn, I need the truth." She stepped aside. "Then come in." Her office was small and cluttered. She placed an old storage drive on the desk. "I kept this because I knew one day you'd come looking." "What is it?" "The original company records." I stared at her. "Why didn't you give these to me?" "I tried." "When?" 3 years ago." My chest tightened. "I never received anything." "I know." She looked down. "Adrian intercepted it." I sat silently. Then she said something that changed everything. He didn't just want your company. What did he want? Your technology. Why? Because Aurora wasn't only a security product. She hesitated. It could analyze patterns inside corrupted media faster than anything on the market. With enough development, it could become the backbone of a global verification system. I looked at the files. And you knew? Yes. Why didn't you tell Lena? Because Adrian was watching her. I felt something cold move through me. Why? Because he knew you would protect her before protecting yourself. That sentence was painfully accurate. Evelyn continued. He used your marriage against you. I looked away. All those years, all those decisions. Every time I'd step back, every time I had allowed someone else to take credit, they hadn't simply been taking advantage of my patience. They had been using the one weakness I never admitted I had. Lena, I left Evelyn's office with the storage drive. That evening, I began rebuilding Aurora. I had no employees, no investors, no office, only a laptop, a rented room, and a dream I had abandoned. For the first few weeks, almost nothing worked. Code crashed. Servers failed. I ran out of money. One night, I sat on the floor, eating instant noodles, and laughed at myself. 3 years earlier, I had believed selling my company was the end. Now I realized it had only delayed the beginning. I started again, slowly. A former engineer named Noah joined me after seeing an early demonstration. Then a university researcher named Priya. Then 2 young developers who didn't care about my past. They only cared whether the technology worked. That became the most peaceful period of my life. Nobody asked who my wife was. Nobody cared about red carpets. Nobody measured my value by the number of people who recognized my face. They simply asked one question. Can you solve this? And for the first time in years, I was allowed to answer with my own name. Meanwhile, Lena's life was falling apart. She began hearing thoughts everywhere. At film meetings, at rehearsals, during interviews, even from people who smiled at her. One producer thought she was difficult. Another secretly wanted her contract canceled. Her manager was planning to leave. Her publicist was leaking stories. But the worst thoughts came from Adrian. She'll come back to me once Daniel is gone. She still needs someone to protect her career. The company will collapse without Aurora. Lena finally understood. Adrian had never been protecting her. He had been positioning himself beside her. And Daniel had never been using her. He had been quietly building walls around her while she complained that the walls were hiding her from the world. One night, Lena sat alone in our old house. She opened a drawer. Inside was the paper star from our honeymoon. She unfolded it. On the inside, in faded ink, I had written, "For the day you forget that I am on your side." Lena covered her mouth. And for the first time since gaining her strange ability, she wished desperately that she couldn't hear thoughts. Because she already knew what my silence meant. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. 6 months after I left, Aurora received its first serious investment offer. I rejected it. Noah stared at me. They offered $10 million. I know. Why did you say no? Because they want controlling rights. You could become rich. I'd rather own what I build. He smiled. That's the first sensible thing you've said. I laughed. We kept working. 3 months later, Aurora was ready. Our demonstration was simple. A manipulated video was shown to the system. Within seconds, Aurora identified every altered frame and reconstructed the original sequence. The room went silent. One investor whispered, "This could change digital media." I didn't respond. I had heard promises before. I wanted proof. The proof came 2 weeks later. A major international news network signed a pilot contract. Then another. Then a government research institute requested a demonstration. Our small company suddenly wasn't small anymore. But I didn't celebrate the way I imagined I would. I thought about Lena. Not because I wanted her back. Because I remembered how many nights she had sat beside me while I worked on the original prototype. She used to bring coffee at 2 in the morning. "You're going to make something amazing," she'd say. And I always answered, "Only if you keep the coffee coming." Those memories didn't hurt as much anymore. They had become part of my history, not my future. Back in the city, Lena discovered something that made her confront the truth. She had been invited to a private meeting with Adrian. He expected her to apologize. Instead, she asked, Did you steal Daniel's technology? His mind answered before his mouth did. She knows. Lena's hands trembled. You did. Adrian denied it, but she could hear everything. He had bribed employees. He had manipulated financial records. He had used Lena's credentials to authorize transfers. And he had arranged the media leak. She stood. I'm finished. Adrian grabbed her arm. You think Daniel will take you back? Lena pulled away. I don't need him to. Adrian laughed. You're nothing without people like me. Lena looked at him. No. Her voice was calm. I was nothing when I believed that. She left. The next morning, she went to her lawyers. The evidence was overwhelming. Adrian's production company faced investigations, contract cancellations, and lawsuits. His investors pulled out. The same people who once praised him suddenly refused to answer his calls. There was no dramatic downfall, just consequences. One decision after another. One door closing after another. Meanwhile, I was in a conference room signing the largest contract Aurora had ever received. When the meeting ended, Noah handed me my phone. You have 47 missed calls. From who? Lena. I stared at the screen. I didn't call back. Noah looked at me. You okay? Yes. Then why do you look sad? Because some people can be forgiven long before they can be trusted again. He nodded. That evening, Lena sent me one message. I finally know the truth. I didn't answer. Another message arrived. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Still nothing. Then, I know you don't owe me a reply. I stared at those words for a long time. Because they were different. For the first time, she wasn't asking me to comfort her. She wasn't asking me to return. She wasn't asking me to fix her life. She was simply acknowledging the damage she had caused. I finally replied. Thank you for saying it. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. She didn't send anything else. And somehow, that silence felt more sincere than every apology she had ever spoken. Months passed. Aurora expanded. I moved into a larger house near the sea. Noah became my business partner. Priya became head of research. Our team grew to nearly 50 people. I began speaking at universities. Students asked me how I had built a company from nothing. I always gave them the same answer. From failure. One afternoon, after a lecture, a young woman approached me. Her name was Clara. She was an investigative journalist who had covered the digital security industry. I heard your story, she said. Which version? She smiled. The real one. We began talking. Not about Lena. Not about Adrian. Not about fame. About work. Books. Travel. The ocean. She didn't know how to flatter me. She didn't need to. When she laughed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not excitement. Not obsession. Peace. And that frightened me more than love ever had. Because I realized I was finally ready to love someone without losing myself. By the time Lena saw me again, almost a year had passed. She had seen photographs of me online. Aurora had become one of the fastest-growing verification companies in the industry. My face had appeared in business magazines. But photographs were different from reality. Reality was seeing me walk into a conference hall wearing a simple dark suit, speaking confidently about technology while 100 people listened. No security team. No celebrity wife beside me. No need to hide behind anyone. Lena was sitting in the back row. I noticed her halfway through my presentation. For 1 second, my mind returned to the old days. Then the feeling passed. I continued speaking. After the event, she waited outside. Daniel. I stopped. She looked different. Not physically. She was still Lena Hart, still famous, still beautiful. But the confidence she once carried like armor had disappeared. Congratulations, she said. Thank you. I didn't know you were speaking tonight. I didn't know you were coming. She smiled faintly. I wasn't sure I should. I didn't answer. She looked at me. I heard your speech. I hope it was useful. It was. A pause. You've changed. I nodded. So have you. Her eyes lowered. I deserve that. I wasn't insulting you. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, Are you happy? The question surprised me. I considered it honestly. Yes. Her face tightened. Good, she said quietly. And I believe she meant it. Then Clara appeared beside me. Daniel, they're waiting for you. Lena looked at her. Clara smiled politely. Hi. Hi. There was no hostility. No jealousy. Just two women standing on opposite sides of a life I had already chosen. I introduced them. This is Clara. Lena nodded. I've read your articles. And I've watched your films. They exchanged a small smile. Then Clara turned to me. Are you coming? In a minute. She nodded and walked away. Lena watched her leave. She knows everything? About my past? Yes. Yes. And she still chose you? I smiled. She chose me after knowing it. Lena looked down. That must feel good. It does. She took a slow breath. Daniel, I want to tell you something. You don't have to. I do. She looked directly at me. When I first started hearing people's thoughts, I thought it would help me find the truth. It didn't. It showed me how complicated people are. She paused. Some people think cruel things, but never act on them. Some people say kind things while planning terrible things. And some people love you, but still hurt you. I remained silent. I heard Adrian's thoughts, she continued. I heard my manager's thoughts. My friends. My lawyers. Her voice cracked. And I heard yours. I looked at her. What did you hear? Nothing. She laughed sadly. That's what frightened me. I frowned. You were always thinking about everyone else. Me. My career. My safety. She swallowed. But after you left, there was no voice begging me to return. I said nothing. There was just silence. Her eyes filled with tears. That was when I knew I had really lost you. I wanted to comfort her. The old instinct returned. But I didn't act on it. Instead, I said, you didn't lose me because I changed. She looked at me. You lost the version of me who would accept anything just to keep you. She nodded slowly. I know. Then she asked the question I had expected for months. Is Claire your girlfriend? I smiled. Not officially. Lena looked surprised. Why? Because we're taking our time. She smiled faintly. That sounds healthy. It is. For a moment, we stood together like two strangers who happened to share a history. Then she said, I filed the divorce papers. I looked at her. When? 2 months ago. I hadn't known. I didn't want to force you to sign anything. I'll sign. She nodded. Thank you. There was no dramatic scene. No tears falling into each other's arms. Just two people finally accepting that love could end without becoming hatred. Then Lena reached in her purse. She pulled out the paper star. I stared at it. You kept it. So did you. I smiled. I thought you threw it away. I almost did. She handed it to me. It's yours. I took it. Why? Because it belongs with the person who wrote it. I closed my fingers around the little star. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. And for the first time, I realized something important. Closure wasn't getting an apology. It was no longer needing one. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. There were headlines. There were rumors. There were people who blamed Lena. Others blamed me. Some claimed our marriage had been fake from the beginning. We never corrected them. The truth belonged to us. After the divorce, Lena's career slowly recovered. She stopped working with people who treated her like a product. She chose smaller films. She even turned down several enormous contracts because she wanted creative control. I was proud of her, but I didn't tell her. Not because I was bitter, because I had learned the difference between caring and interfering. Clara and I became closer. Our relationship grew quietly. There were no announcements, no photographs, no public declarations, just ordinary things. Breakfast, long drives, arguments about books, walking along the beach. The first time she saw me exhausted after a terrible business meeting, she didn't tell me to calm down. She simply sat beside me. You don't have to solve everything tonight. I looked at her. You're not afraid of me failing? She smiled. Why would I be? Because everyone expects me to succeed now. I'm not everyone. That sentence stayed with me. Months later, Aurora received a proposal from an international corporation. They wanted to acquire us for an amount that would have changed my life permanently. Noah wanted to consider it. Priya wanted to reject it. I wasn't sure. Then I remembered the old version of myself. The man who had once sold everything because he thought someone else's dream mattered more than his own. I didn't want to make that mistake again. So I made the decision myself. We didn't sell. Instead, we expanded carefully. Aurora established a research foundation that provided grants to young engineers. That became the part of the company I loved most. One afternoon, a student named Amir asked me after a lecture, Why did you keep going when everyone thought you had failed? I thought about it. Because failure isn't always losing. He waited. Sometimes failure is discovering that the life you were fighting to keep isn't the life you actually want. He nodded. Then he asked, so what should you do? I smiled. Build again. That evening, I returned home. Clara was cooking. Badly. Smoke filled the kitchen. I stopped in the doorway. What happened? She turned around holding a spatula. Dinner. You're burning it. I know. I laughed. She threw the spatula onto the counter. You're impossible. I walked over and opened the window. I thought you respected my expertise. Not in cooking. We laughed. It was such an ordinary moment. And, somehow, it felt more valuable than every award Aurora had received. Later that night, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Lena and me from our first year together. On the back, she had written, "Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love you properly." There was another line. "I hope one day the memory of me doesn't hurt anymore." I sat quietly for a long time. Then I placed the photograph in a drawer. Not because I wanted to erase her. Because I didn't. She had been part of my life. A painful part. A beautiful part. A part that had taught me something I could never have learned any other way. That night, Clara found me staring out the window. "What are you thinking about?" "My past. Do you miss it?" I shook my head. "I miss who I was before I understood it." She sat beside me. "Would you go back?" I looked at her. "No." "Why?" "Because I wouldn't have met you." She smiled. Then she leaned against my shoulder. Outside, the ocean was dark. The city lights reflected across the water. I thought about the man who had once stood alone at a celebrity gala, holding his wife's coat while everyone around him believed he was invisible. That man had spent years thinking his value came from what he could sacrifice. He was wrong. My value wasn't in how much pain I could endure for someone. It wasn't in how quietly I could disappear. And it certainly wasn't in whether a famous woman chose me. It was in a life I could build when nobody was choosing me at all. I had finally stopped asking, will they come back? I was asking something better. What I want to build next. And for the first time, I had an answer. Everything. 2 years after my divorce from Lena, I thought the past had finally become quiet. Then Aurora was attacked. It began with a small report from one of our engineers. "Daniel, someone accessed the old architecture." I looked up. "Which architecture?" "Project Aurora." My stomach tightened. "That system hasn't been connected to the old servers for years." "I know." He turned his laptop toward me. "There was a login last night. The account belonged to Evelyn." I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel, did you access Aurora?" "No." I stared at the screen. "Then someone is using your credentials." She went silent. "Daniel," she said finally, "there's something I never told you." I waited. When Adrian stole the original technology, he didn't take everything. What did he take? A partial model. And he couldn't make it work. I understood. He needed the original creator. Yes. And that's why he spent years trying to control me. It would be in sight. He knew you wouldn't sell your work to him. So he tried to destroy my reputation. Yes. I leaned back. All those years. The rumors. The leaked documents. The false accusations. The manipulation of Lena. It had never been about money alone. Adrian had wanted Aurora because he knew what it could become. But he had underestimated one thing. I had rebuilt it, and a new version was mine. I called an emergency meeting. Noah and Priya arrived within 20 minutes. "We lock everything down?" I said. Noah nodded. "What about the legal side?" "We document every access." Priya looked at me. "Do you think Adrian is behind it?" "He's the only person who benefits." But Adrian wasn't the one who appeared on the security footage. It was someone I recognized. A former Aurora employee. Someone who had once worked directly under me. His name was Victor. He had disappeared after the company collapsed. We found him the next day. He didn't run. He simply sat across from me in a small cafe. "I was paid," he admitted. "By Adrian?" "Yes." "Why?" Victor looked ashamed. "Because he threatened my family." I didn't speak. He continued. "He told me if I didn't cooperate, he'd destroy my brother's medical business." I stared at him. "You could have come to me." I was afraid. I understood that. Fear had made people do terrible things before. I gave him a choice. "Give me everything you have, and then I'll make sure your statement is part of the investigation. He looked surprised. You're not going to destroy me? No. Why? Because I know what it feels like to have someone decide your entire future for you. He lowered his head. That evening, the authorities had enough evidence to begin a formal investigation. Adrian's remaining business interests were frozen. His legal team abandoned him. But the strangest call came from Lena. I heard what happened. You don't need to involve yourself. I know. A pause. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. I smiled. Thank you. Daniel? Yes. Do you hate him? I thought about Adrian. No. Why not? Because I don't want him taking any more space in my mind. She was quiet. Then she laughed softly. You finally learned. What? To stop carrying people who hurt you. I smiled. Yes. She breathed in. I'm glad. The call ended. I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Not because Lena wanted me back, but because we could finally speak without trying to reopen the past. A month later, the investigation concluded. Adrian was charged for fraud, intellectual property theft, and financial manipulation. The consequences were severe but ordinary. His company collapsed. His investors sued him. His reputation disappeared. There was no dramatic revenge, only the weight of his own decisions. And then something unexpected happened. Lena released a statement. She publicly accepted responsibility for trusting Adrian and for failing to defend me when the first accusations appeared. She didn't mention my name at first. Then she did. I hurt someone who had spent years protecting me, she said. I cannot undo that. I can only stop pretending it didn't happen. The statement went viral. People expected me to respond. I didn't. Clara asked me why. Because she doesn't need my permission to tell the truth. She smiled. That's probably the healthiest thing you've ever said. I laughed. Maybe it was. A few weeks later, Lena visited Aurora. Not as my wife. Not as a celebrity. As a guest. She walked through the office and watched young engineers working. This is what you wanted? I nodded. It became bigger than I imagined. She looked around. I wish I had seen it. You weren't ready. She nodded. I wasn't. Then she looked at me. Neither was I. For the first time, there was no bitterness between us. Only distance. Healthy distance. She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. Daniel. Yes. Do you think we could have made it? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, maybe. Her eyes lowered. But we weren't the people we needed to be. She nodded. That hurts. I know, but it's true. Yes. She smiled sadly. Goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, Lena. She left. And I realized that sometimes the final goodbye wasn't about closing a door. It was about finally accepting that you didn't need to stand beside it anymore. 3 years after I first left our house, Aurora opened its research foundation. We invited universities from around the world. Young engineers came to present ideas. Some were brilliant. Some failed. Some were nervous. I recognized myself in all of them. During the opening ceremony, I looked across the crowd and saw Clara standing near the back. She wasn't interested in the cameras. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for herself. I smiled. She mouthed, "You look nervous." I shook my head. She raised an eyebrow. I laughed. Then I stepped onto the stage. My company began with an idea that most people thought was too difficult. I said, I looked at the young researchers. But the hardest part wasn't building the technology. I paused. The hardest part was believing I was allowed to build something for myself. The audience became silent. I spent years believing love meant sacrifice. I thought protecting someone meant making myself smaller. I thought being patient meant accepting anything. I looked toward Clara. Then I learned that real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Applause filled the room. Afterward, I found Lena waiting outside. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young boy. She smiled. "This is my nephew, Ethan." The boy looked at me. "Are you the Aurora guy?" I laughed. "I suppose I am." He nodded seriously. "My aunt says you're very smart." I looked at Lena. "She said that." "She says a lot of nice things now," Ethan replied. Lena laughed. I smiled. It was strange. Years ago, I would have imagined a reunion like this ending in tears. Instead, it was peaceful. Lena looked at me. "You seem happy." "I am." She glanced toward Clara. "She seems good for you." "She is." Lena nodded. "I've learned something." "What?" You don't need someone who hears your thoughts. I smiled. No, you need someone who listens when you speak. I looked at her. That took you a while. She laughed. It did. We stood there for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you left. I was surprised. Really? Yes. She looked toward the stage. If you had stayed, you might never have become this person. I considered her words. You became someone too. I hope so. She smiled. I still miss parts of us. So do I. But I don't want them back. Neither did I. That was the strangest part. The memories could remain beautiful without becoming instructions for the future. Lena walked away with Ethan. I watched them disappear into the crowd. Clara came to stand beside me. You okay? Yes. Really? I nodded. I think that was the last piece. What piece? The part of me that needed the past to mean something different. She took my hand. You don't need that anymore. No. We walked outside. The sun was setting over the city. 3 years earlier, I had driven away from this place with a suitcase and no idea where I was going. Now I had a company, a team, a foundation, friends, a woman who loved me without needing me to prove anything, and a life that belonged entirely to me. That night, I returned home and opened the drawer where I had kept the old paper star. I unfolded it one last time. The ink was fading. I read the sentence again. For the day you forget that I am on your side. I smiled. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back. Not as a promise. Not as an invitation. Just as a memory. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Claire was still asleep. I made coffee. Then I stood by the window and watched the first light appear over the water. My phone buzzed. A message from Aurora's research team. We have a breakthrough. I smiled. There was a time when those words would have made me think about who I needed to impress. Now they simply made me excited about what came next. I typed, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Then I looked back at Clara. She opened one eye. Work? Yes. You're impossible. I know. She smiled and went back to sleep. I laughed quietly. Then I walked out the door. I didn't know exactly what the next chapter would bring. And for once, I didn't need to. I had spent years trying to preserve a life that had already ended. Now I understood something much simpler. Sometimes the person you lose is not your greatest tragedy. Sometimes losing them is the first moment you finally meet yourself. And once you do, you stop asking who will choose you. You start choosing your own life. That was the truth Lena finally heard. And it was the truth I had taken years to understand. 5 years after I left Lena, Aurora faced its biggest challenge. Not a competitor, not a lawsuit, not another betrayal. Success itself. We had grown from 4 people in a rented office to hundreds of employees across several countries. Our technology protected news organizations, film studios, universities, and legal archives from manipulated digital evidence. But growth brought something I had never expected. People began treating me like the man I used to pretend to be. They call me a visionary, a genius, a leader. Young employees asked for photographs. Investors wanted dinners. Journalists wanted interviews. Sometimes I caught myself enjoying it. Then I would remember the man sitting on the floor, eating instant noodles after leaving his marriage. He had nothing except a laptop and a stubborn belief that he could begin again. I never wanted to lose him. One morning, Clara found me staring at an old article about Aurora. You're thinking too much. I do that. She sat beside me. About Lena? I shook my head. About the company. You're allowed to be proud. I am. Then why do you look worried? Because I'm afraid success will turn me into someone who needs to be admired. She smiled. Then don't become that person. It sounded simple. It wasn't. But Clara had a way of making difficult things sound possible. That afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. Lena was being honored for her work in independent cinema. She had asked me to attend. Not publicly, privately. I almost declined. Then I realized I wasn't afraid of seeing her anymore. So I went. The ceremony was smaller than the events we had attended during our marriage. No giant advertisements. No endless photographers. Just filmmakers, actors, writers, and people who genuinely love the work. Lena walked onto the stage. She received the award. Then she spoke. I used to think being heard meant having millions of people listening to me. She paused. Now I understand that being heard by one person who truly cares can be worth more than all of that. I knew she wasn't speaking directly to me, but I understood. After the ceremony, we met outside. You came, she said. I did. Thank you. You deserve the award. She smiled. I wanted you to see what I became. I looked at her. You did well. She nodded. Did you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't learned to hear thoughts? I smiled. Probably. Would you have stayed? I thought carefully. Maybe longer. She nodded. But would you have left eventually? Yes. She looked relieved. Why? Because even without the mind reading, the truth was already there. Her eyes lowered. I know. We stood beneath a quiet streetlight. Then she said, I don't want you back. I laughed softly. That sounds almost insulting. She laughed too. No, I mean it differently. She looked at me. I don't want the old marriage back. I don't want the old Daniel back. I don't even want the old version of myself back. I nodded. That might be the healthiest thing you've ever said. She smiled. I learned from you. I hope you learned from yourself. She considered that. Maybe both. Then she asked, Are you going to marry Clara? I smiled. Probably. Probably. I haven't proposed yet. Lena laughed. You're still slow. I like doing things carefully. She nodded. That was always your strength. We said goodbye. No tears. No promises. No unfinished business. Just gratitude. 2 months later, I took Clara to the small coastal town where I had first rebuilt Aurora. We walked along the beach. She looked at me suspiciously. Why are you acting strange? I am not. You've been quiet for 20 minutes. That happens. No, it doesn't. I stopped. She turned. I took a small box from my pocket. Her expression changed. Daniel, I spent years believing love meant giving someone everything I had. She stared at me. Then I learned that love isn't disappearing into another person. I opened the box. It is choosing each other while remaining whole. Her eyes filled with tears. So, I smiled. So, Clara, will you build the rest of your life with me? She laughed through her tears. Yes. She hugged me. And for once, there was no fear in the future. Only possibility. We married quietly the following spring. No giant celebrity wedding. No magazine exclusive. No carefully designed publicity campaign. Just family, close friends, the Aurora team, and a small ceremony near the sea. Lena sent a gift. A wooden box. Inside was the old paper star. For a moment, I couldn't move. There was a note beneath it. Some things should not be forgotten. They should simply be put where they belong. I smiled. Then I placed the star inside my desk drawer. Not beside my business papers. Not beside photographs. Just somewhere safe. Years passed. Aurora continued growing. The foundation helped hundreds of students. Clara published books. Lena became known not simply as a celebrity, but as a serious filmmaker who chose meaningful projects over fame. Adrian disappeared from our lives. His company was gone. His name occasionally appeared in old articles about corporate fraud, but I stopped reading them. His consequences were no longer my concern. Evelyn became a trusted advisor to Aurora's foundation. She once joked that she had spent years trying to convince me to stop carrying everyone's problems. You finally listened, she said. Eventually, very eventually. We laughed. And that was how the story truly ended. Not with revenge. Not with someone kneeling. Not with my former wife begging me to return. It ended with ordinary mornings. Coffee. Work. Family. Arguments about what to eat for dinner. Clara complaining that I worked too late. Me pretending I wasn't listening. A house filled with laughter. A life that didn't need an audience. Sometimes people asked me whether I regretted marrying Lena. I never knew how to answer. Because regret was too simple. I didn't regret loving her. I regretted forgetting myself while I loved her. There was a difference. Lena had once been the center of my world. Then she became a lesson. Then, finally, she became a memory. And memories don't have to disappear to stop controlling you. Years later, I attended one of Lena's film premieres. Clara came with me. Lena saw us from across the room. She smiled. We exchanged a brief hug. How are you? She asked. Good. Really? I looked at Clara. Then back at Lena. Really? She smiled. I'm glad. The lights dimmed. The film began. It was about two people who loved each other but couldn't grow in the same direction. When the credits rolled, I sat quietly. Clara squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded. I think she finally told her own story. Clara smiled. Maybe you did too. On the drive home, I looked out at the city lights. I remember the gala where everything had changed. Lena had suddenly been able to hear minds. She had heard my thoughts. She had discovered that I had hidden a company, sacrificed my dream, and protected her without asking for recognition. But that wasn't the most important truth she discovered. The most important truth was that my silence wasn't guilt. It was exhaustion. I had spent years proving that I loved her. When I finally stopped proving it, she mistook my silence for betrayal. Then she heard the truth. But by the time she understood it, I had already learned something more important. I didn't need to be understood by everyone. I only needed to understand myself. That was why I could forgive her. That was why I could forgive Evelyn. That was why I could let Adrian's actions disappear into history. And that was why I could love Clara without fear. Because I no longer confused love with sacrifice. I no longer believed patience meant accepting disrespect. I no longer thought leaving meant losing. Sometimes leaving is how you save the part of yourself that still has something beautiful left to build. If Lena had never learned to hear minds, perhaps our marriage would have lasted longer. Maybe we would have smiled for cameras. Maybe we would have continued pretending. Maybe I would have kept shrinking quietly. But she did hear minds. And eventually, she heard mine. She heard the truth I had never been brave enough to say aloud. I love you, but I cannot disappear for you anymore. That was the sentence that ended our marriage. It was also the sentence that began my life. Years later, when people asked me what my greatest achievement was, they expected me to mention Aurora. Sometimes I did, but the real answer was simpler. My greatest achievement was learning that my life had value even when nobody was applauding. I built a company. I built a family. I built a future. But most importantly, I rebuilt myself. And once I did, I no longer needed the people who had hurt me to regret losing me. Their regret belonged to them. My peace belonged to me. And that was enough.